Hey everyone, my name is Chris A, and today I want to talk about the cult of personal responsibility and the king of the world. Ben Shapiro recently appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience to say some racist stuff. Shapiro admitted that generational history, as recently as someone's grandparents, can have a significant impact on present day.
If you have a grandfather who went to prison on a particular charge, that leads to poverty for your parents, which led to more poverty for you, right?
My parents were born 4 years before the Civil Rights Act, which means that my grandparents were well into adulthood before Jim Crow was abolished. It would be absurd to suggest that my grandparents' access to education, employment, healthcare, and housing doesn't affect my life to this day. And if they had been black, that access would have been severely limited. So then later in the interview, when Rogan mentions that Jim Crow affected people still alive today, why does Shapiro deflect with,
if you go from the civil rights movement to 2020, we're really not talking about that much time. We're
talking
talking
three
about
generations,
50 plus years.
60 years, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
50 plus.
Shapiro recognizes a system of crime and poverty among black and brown folks, but instead of the racist systems Rogan identifies,
red line laws and all the other things that were put in place to sort of keep them in very specific areas.
Shapiro blames it on personal responsibility. Sure, your father and a third of your community's fathers were unjustly incarcerated, and you were born into poverty, and you have minimal job prospects, but it's your fault for doing a crime. Shapiro could use the excuse of small government to justify his beliefs. He could suggest that small businesses and nonprofits bear the responsibility of lifting up their community. But he doesn't. He just claims that it's each individual's job to escape generations of poverty. They just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Obviously, Shapiro's insistence is nothing new. I'm sure we've all heard that poor people just need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. But have you ever thought about what this means? The expression pulling yourself up by one's bootstraps is from the 19th century and is used to describe an impossible task like, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. The first appearance of this expression was in 1834. It is conjectured that Mr. Murphy will now be enabled to hand himself over the Cumberland River or a barnyard fence by the straps of his boots. Now, as a descriptionist, I'm obliged to point out that the meaning of the phrase has changed over time, and it's well recognized to no longer specifically refer to an impossible task. And in that case, it's not the worst advice. You are probably the most reliable person in your life when it comes to tending to your own needs. If you can't rely on others, you should take some responsibility for your own well-being. But certainly there's a limit. You wouldn't tell a person with a terminal illness that it's their personal responsibility to get better. Certain scenarios, common scenarios, are best addressed by the collective. We can advocate for individualism till the cows come home, but just like any ideology, it can't possibly be the best approach for any situation. So are there people in the US who are so impoverished that simply pulling themselves up by their bootstraps is an impossible task? The research would suggest so. In an Economist article from earlier this year, Raj Chetty, a Harvard economist, found that absolute mobility has dropped from 90% to 50%, meaning it is about a coin flip chance if you'll earn more than your parents. And in nearly every part of America, the path for black boys is steeper. But when Shapiro talks about crime, he ignores the realities of social mobility. He again makes it a personal choice.
How much of that is historic redlining and how much of that is an 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody?
But imagine you were born into an impoverished area. Your school would probably be substandard since schools are funded by property taxes. And chances are, due to mass incarceration, many of the fathers in your community would be in jail, maybe even your own. And your parent or parents have limited access to employment due to their own underfunded education and possible criminal history. Do you start selling drugs because it's cool or fun? No, you do it because you need to survive, and it's a way to make money for your family.
There's no one else to guide you through through the maze that is life inside those projects, except for drug dealers. You start looking up to them, and that's how I got into the street life.
So what would Shapiro's advice to a 16-year-old Jay-Z be? Surely a child could be forgiven for providing his family the only way he knows how. And Shapiro makes it clear that poverty and crime should be addressed at the individual level. So we're left with Ethics 101. Should this poor child steal the bread or let his family starve?
I would not steal the bread, and I would not let my family go hungry.
We all know that individualism is an ideology valued by conservatives. Ostensibly, conservatives prefer small government, with the idea being that individuals ought to take care of themselves and each other rather than rely on government for public assistance. This is fine and all on paper, but we should only understand it as an ideal. We all rely on government for roads, education, postal service, and other amenities. So as much as any of us could strive to be individualists, there will always be some collectivism sprinkled in there. Unfortunately, like so many other conservative values, individualism has been co-opted by regressives in what I will refer to as the cult of personal responsibility. Perhaps the single biggest proponent of the cult of personal responsibility is Jordan Peterson, who came to prominence after just straight up lying about some civil rights legislation. He's not a lawyer. If you've watched any of Peterson's lectures, you'll know that he is strictly anti-activism. While it's fair to say that he opposes activism because he opposes the goals of liberals and leftists,
it isn't obvious to me that legalizing gay marriage has done anything to decrease the demands that the radical left neo-Marxist types are placing on traditional society.
he pretends to oppose it in the interest of personal responsibility.
It's an abdication of responsibility with the mask of social virtue. You want to solve a difficult problem, is you figure out how to get along with your brother, the one you've been fighting with for 5 years, or see if you can staple your family back together. See if you can stop fighting with your girlfriend and have a relationship that lasts for more than 2 weeks.
What? As a culture, I think we've decided that solving society's problems is one of the most noble and important jobs there is. We revere folks who dedicate their lives to improving society, like teachers, doctors, nurses, scientists. So if solving our community's problems isn't as important as cleaning your room and finding a girlfriend, I struggle to think of what is. Peterson's audience is primarily young white men, and if he's the only one these young men are hearing "take care of yourself" from, honestly, that's fine. But it seems a little weird to then use this as an excuse to discredit all activism. In at least one of his lectures, Peterson discourages activism using a straw man argument.
Go out there with a stick and a sign on it that says, "I'm against poverty." It's like, yeah, no kidding, man. Really. Like, who's for poverty? No one's for poverty.
This is intellectually lazy. First off, this is a vast oversimplification of how activism works. Even assuming this straw activist, Stractivist, wasn't donating money, volunteering time, and directly petitioning lawmakers, have you ever heard of a protest so vague as being simply anti-poverty? Beyond that, he's lying. Not everyone is against poverty. I bet someone like Jeff Bezos is pretty okay with poverty since he makes orders of magnitudes more than his employees, some of whom live in poverty. And if he really wasn't okay with poverty, he could, solve hunger in the US or provide tuition-free college to everyone and still be a multi-billionaire. And there's a fundamental flaw in what Peterson is saying. Protests by definition are a rejection of the status quo. He's right to suggest that activism that everyone agrees with is redundant, but he's wrong to suggest that this ever happens. So then why is Peterson so desperate to discourage activism that he's willing to lie about it? Back to the Joe Rogan show. Rogan clearly catches on that Shapiro doesn't have a substantive answer on how to solve the problems they're discussing. Just, stop being poor. So he poses the question.
If Ben Shapiro is the king of the world, how do you fix Baltimore? How do you fix Detroit? How do you fix the south side of Chicago?
Of course, this is the perfect opportunity for Shapiro to say, well, I'd make sure everyone had food, healthcare, job opportunities, housing. Sure, this would be unusual for someone who claims to favor small government, but this is an idealized hypothetical. Surely if Shapiro was king of the world, government would be exactly as large as it needs to be while still protecting and taking care of its citizens. Government, for all its flaws, is the most effective way we have to organize humans. And it's something we're already paying for anyway. So surely, in a perfect world, this most effective organization would be the way to solve humanity's problems.
You need social institutions outside of government that are promoting things like family.
Individualism under certain circumstances can be ethical. It's good to take care of yourself and your family. The problem comes when your individualism causes your community to suffer. Let's take Peterson and Shapiro at their words. They're both constantly preaching about ethics and presenting personal responsibility as the solution to all life's problems. Let's assume they're doing what they're doing to make the world a better place. Why? If they're individualists to the point of opposing activism, or if they would refuse to help impoverished people even with all the power in the world, why are they helping people now? Well, they're not. That's obvious, right? They're just in it for the money. And here's where I'll draw the line between individualism and the cult of personal responsibility. While individualism just encourages a power imbalance, the cult of personal responsibility requires it. I can sit up here and preach individualism to you under the pretense of helping my community, but you can't help your community. You need to clean your room. You just need to focus on the individual, and that's how you'll get ahead in life.
There are things that you should be doing in the confines of your own life that are private and humble, that would constitute genuine accomplishments, and those are the things that you should attend to.
Which creates this fun little loop. They're preaching individualism by pretending to care about the collective, but are just doing it for the sole purpose of benefiting themselves as individuals. When I started writing this, I was using the word cult figuratively. Cult of personal responsibility was just a play on cult of personality, and I thought it was catchy. But as I looked more into these ideas and those who propagate them, a pattern began to emerge. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that fans of Shapiro or Peterson constitute a cult, but both men are charismatic. They're seen as leaders to millions of followers. They appeal to young people, particularly men, disillusioned with their station in life. They have histories of lying to their audience, and their opponents are not only wrong, but wrong-headed.
Okay, so you would not vote for a Democrat under any circumstance or some circumstance?
I mean, I would say some circumstance, but the Democratic Party would have to stop being insane.
And in researching warning signs of cults, one particular idea leapt out at me. Followers feel they can never be good enough.
Because the evil isn't elsewhere. That's the thing that you understand when you're wise, is the evil is not elsewhere. It's you, because you're not everything you could be.
So why does any of this matter? It all comes back to that Shapiro interview. Shapiro has conditioned his audience to accept his every word as gospel, and the thing to come out of this appearance has been Shapiro denying the reality of racism in the US. Cults require a hypervigilant rejection of critical thought. They will always encourage their members to reject new ideas. And for the audiences of Peterson and Shapiro, new ideas might include things like gender-neutral pronouns.
I'm very excited that Merriam-Webster Dictionary has now added the non-binary pronoun they to the dictionary.
Or white privilege.
You can't just do that, say it's white privilege.
Between the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, and a president who was impeached for crimes by Congress, this is a critical moment in US history. And yet we live in a time when Joe Rogan, of all people, has taken it upon himself to learn about the 400 years of racism in this country. Yes, this Joe Rogan.
On go, your partner is gonna smash their face into this box of testicles, grab one of them with their mouth, and then shove it into your mouth.
So please, and I'm not sure I'd ever say this, follow Joe Rogan's lead. Educate yourself. And if someone's entire ideology requires you to reject new ideas and not participate in your community, they don't care about you. Maya Angelou once said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And the leaders of the cult of personal responsibility have shown us exactly who they are. If you are sick or poor or working 2 jobs or can't get a quality education, and these men had all the power in the world, we know just how they'd help you.
You have to load the place with police.